Because at the present time, excitotoxins, the subject of excitotoxins, is the hottest idea and item going in the field of neuroscience. That is the study of the brain and the nervous system. Every journal that has anything to do with the brain and the nervous system is filled with articles about excitotoxins. Every research laboratory that is dealing with the diseases like Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, Lou Gehrig disease, Huntington's disease, all these terrible diseases of the brain, the number one thing that they're talking about is excitotoxins. We're going to concentrate all this money and all this effort in studying how the brain works and solving the problem of these terrible diseases of the brain. Despite all of that, hardly anyone in the general public has ever heard the word excitotoxin. And that's not by accident. It's because the number one source of excitotoxins in our society is in your food. And it's not in your natural foods. It's being added to your food by the industry that processes foods. And they're adding it in very large concentrations. Now, what I have found out since I wrote this book, and this book was a very difficult thing to write. I went through a long period before I ever decided to do it, because I was warned by people who had dealt in this area before when I told them I wanted to write a book. One of the persons who first tried to start in this crusade, he said, well, that's fine, but let me warn you something. You're going to come under attack like you've never dreamed of. He said, Ralph Nader, most of you I assume know Ralph Nader, the consumer advocate. He became interested in this at one point, just one segment of it. He was so browbeaten and so destroyed by this industry, he said he would never touch it again. And I talked to his attorney, Jim Turner, who told me this story. He said they were through with it. And this is a man that took on General Motors. So it's something that is not a light thing to take. So I was warned. Said they have hundreds of millions of dollars they will spend to keep you from getting this story out. They will threaten lawsuits. They will intimidate you in every way imaginable. So if you do this, be prepared. And so when I wrote the book, I said, what I'm going to do, I'm going to make this argument so tight, so well referenced, that no one can refute it reasonably. So I spent a long time going through hundreds and hundreds of research papers, interviewing the person who coined the term excitotoxin. And then I wrote the book. Interestingly, no major publication will write about this. Your major magazines will not carry stories about it. I've never been interviewed by a major magazine. I've had 60 Minutes call me and wanted to do a story and spiked it. That means they cut it out. I had a writer for the Wall Street Journal editorial page who dared to write about how the story was spiked, and they took him off the editorial page and put him in a non-public office. Had one of the talk programs that's kind of like hard copy that's no longer around. They did an interview. We set up the story. The reporter worked with me. They fired her and canceled the program. The Chicago Tribune newspaper, when I did my first big conference on excitotoxins, the reporter was sitting in the audience. I presented the case for excitotoxin dangers. He attentively listened, and he told the person next to him, who happened to be a friend of mine, that this is the most unbelievable thing I've ever heard in my life. He said, this is terrifying. When the article came out in the Chicago Tribune, he quoted some of the things I've said, and then the rest of it was quoting the industry representatives, which said things that the writer knew was not true. And so I wrote him a letter. And I said, you sat in the audience and you heard all of the evidence I had, scientific evidence, that their reputation and defense of its safety was not true, yet you still wrote this article. I said, I can't tell you what to write, and I know the pressure you're under, but you're going to have to live with the thought of all the damage you've done to children, pregnant women, everyone in this country because of what you've done. And it's because his newspaper was heavily advertised in by General Mills and all the food manufacturers in Michigan. So there's enormous pressure to keep this story quiet. Hard Copy did a thing on the NutraSweet and the pilots, airline pilots that were drinking NutraSweet that were having seizures. They were becoming so confused they couldn't figure out how to land their airplanes. We had one pilot just totally could not figure out, and his co-pilot had to land the plane. There's over 600 pilots now who have come secretly to organizations to tell their stories of the problems with NutraSweet. Health food magazines generally will not touch this story because they sell these things in their health food stores and call it health food. Now, a lot of things in the health food store are fine, but they're putting some items in there that are excitotoxins. It's a big industry, and so there's a lot of pressure to keep this story quiet.